This happened almost 4 years ago, during a long road trip across the western United States. As a fan of nature and adventure, I often drove for hours, stopping at hidden hiking and camping spots far from the crowds. At the time, I had stopped in a tiny town that was barely visible on the map of Nevada. One night, I stopped by a local bar and ended up having a casual conversation with a few residents. One of them asked if I had come to see the old mountain town. I was curious and asked what they meant. It turned out there were hundreds of abandoned mines and mining towns scattered across the area, most now silent places swallowed by time. That night, I looked up more information online. I found one location that seemed accessible by car, followed by a short hike. My plan to leave the state was suddenly put on hold. The next morning, I left early. The hike to the spot was challenging, with a steep trail, but the view was stunning. On top of a flat hill stood the remains of a small mining town, around 20 wooden buildings, weathered and collapsing, facing a single rusted rail line that led straight to a mine entrance on the hillside. I walked along the tracks, past buildings that were mostly empty and full of dust, but I had a clear goal. I wanted to see the mine itself. When I reached the entrance, I turned on my flashlight and pointed it inside. The tunnel was long and dark, seemingly endless. I stepped in, my footsteps echoing loudly. A few minutes in, I reached the end of the tracks. There was an old warning sign saying the area ahead was dangerous and closed off. Of course, I kept going. The tunnel narrowed, the path sloped downward, and eventually I found a section where the ground had collapsed. Some old planks had been placed across it like a makeshift bridge, but they looked too fragile to risk. I decided to turn back and take a side path I had passed earlier. Down that path, I found an old staircase descending sharply. I shined my light down, but it was pitch black. Hesitant, I began to climb down slowly. Then I heard a loud thud from below, like something heavy had fallen, echoing from within the mine. The sound was strong enough to stop me in my tracks. I kept going and finally reached the bottom. A few steps forward, I saw what had made the sound. A large rock had rolled into the middle of the tunnel, but strangely, it didn't match the tunnel walls or ceiling. It looked like it had been thrown from somewhere else. When I pointed my flashlight further ahead, I froze. At the edge of the beam stood two figures, a man and a woman. They were just standing there staring at me, but it wasn't the kind of stare people give when they're surprised to see someone. Their gaze was empty, strange, like they were looking at a creature they couldn't comprehend. I backed away slowly, my body tense. When I reached the staircase, I shoved my flashlight into my pocket and started climbing. Halfway up, I heard a faint sound, like someone grabbing the step beneath me. My heart stopped. I turned around, but all I saw was darkness. Panicked, I scrambled up the stairs as fast as I could, then ran out of the mine without looking back. Even after getting outside, I kept running away from that ghost town, my breath heavy, my head filled with terror. I eventually stopped at the sheriff's office in the nearest town and told them what I had seen. I said the figures looked unnaturally thin. Something wasn't right. Maybe they were runaways, lost hikers, or people hiding down there on purpose. Whatever the case, someone needed to check it out. A few days later, I looked into it myself. I came across some vague reports about a few fugitive couples suspected of hiding out in the surrounding mountains. I still don't know who I saw that day, but one thing's for sure, I was lucky to make it out alive. My best friend Glenn and I grew up in a small village nestled deep in the mountains. The place was so remote that we often didn't even get phone signal. The population was under 1,000, and life there felt frozen in time. Everyone knew everyone, and gossip spread faster than any official news. As we got older, strange stories began to circulate among the villagers. Tales of voices coming from the forest, figures appearing at night, or forbidden places no one was supposed to visit. But the one story people talked about the most was of an old settlement hidden deep in the forest, abandoned long ago. Rumor had it, it was once inhabited by a group of people who lived in isolation before suddenly vanishing without a trace. By the time we were in high school, our curiosity had grown. Glenn had heard from his uncle that the place was real. He even said there was a hidden path that led to it. Without much thought, we agreed to go find it. We only brought 2 bottles of water, a pair of flashlights, and an old compass. After walking about 5 kilometers along a barely visible trail, it suddenly ended in the middle of the woods. No markers, no signs anyone had been there. I wanted to turn back, but Glenn insisted we keep going west, following the sun. After about half an hour, just as we were getting exhausted and the sunlight began to fade, we saw something in the distance. An old structure stood behind thick bushes. It looked like a small, nearly collapsed shack. As we got closer, we realized it wasn't the only building. Beyond it was a wide open area with remnants of a settlement, a few small wooden houses, strange buildings with shapes we couldn't quite identify, and a patch of dead grass surrounded by tree stumps. All the buildings looked fragile and long abandoned, but there was something off. Unlike other empty places, everything felt frozen. Furniture was still in place, even a few chairs stood upright, though weathered. A deep sense of unease settled over me. Glenn looked just as surprised, but he walked into one of the buildings anyway. I chose to explore a different one. It seemed like it used to be a bedroom. While examining a broken window, I heard footsteps outside. I assumed it was Glenn, but when I peeked through a crack in the wooden wall, what I saw made me hold my breath. A middle-aged man was slowly walking past the building. He was skinny, wearing only torn pants, and his skin looked filthy and scarred. The way he moved was strange, like someone who'd been alone for far too long. I slipped out through the back window and hid behind a bush, scanning the area for Glenn. Minutes passed in anxious silence. The sky grew darker, and the forest sounds grew louder. Suddenly, a scream pierced through the air from the far end of the settlement. A scream I knew all too well. It was Glenn. I saw him sprinting across the open field in a panic. As soon as he saw me, we ran back into the forest without a second thought. We ran nonstop, crashing through branches and tripping over roots until we finally found the trail we had come from. The sun was nearly gone by the time we emerged from the woods. When we reached Glenn's house, we sat in silence for several minutes. Then I asked him what had happened. With a pale face, Glenn told me that while he was inside one of the houses, he had a strong feeling he wasn't alone. As he turned to leave, he saw the same man standing in the doorway, holding some sort of long knife. He said the man's eyes were blank, but full of intent. The man lunged at him, and Glenn screamed and bolted. We never found out who that man was, or if he was the only one still living there. But after that night, we never went back into those woods again. And we both agreed. Curiosity can sometimes take you way too far. My final year of high school was filled with dumb decisions, and one of them might have been the most dangerous. I had 2 best friends, Sean and Tyler. The 3 of us grew up in a boring, small town, and our weekend nights were usually spent hanging out in the convenience store parking lot or driving around the hills looking for signal just to get online. That night, we were sitting in Tyler's car, parked behind the quiet school building. The air was cold, the sky overcast, and everything felt too still, even for our sleepy town. We were chatting about random things when Tyler suddenly brought up something he'd once heard from his older brother, a supposedly abandoned house up north, near some old fields, left empty since the early 2000s. "I'm not sure if it's really haunted or not," he said, "but people say it's never been sold, and no one's ever lived there again." We'd heard stories like that before, and usually they were just small-town myths. But that night, with nothing better to do, we figured, why not check it out? If nothing else, at least we could say we visited the local haunted house. We stopped for gas, then drove for nearly half an hour, heading into a stretch of empty fields with barely any streetlights. After a few wrong turns, we finally found a narrow dirt path leading toward what looked like ruins. At the end of the road, hidden among tall grass and overgrown bushes, stood a large 2-story wooden house. The paint was peeling, the windows cracked and dirty. Even from the outside, something about the house just felt off. We parked and got out. Without saying much, we grabbed our flashlights and approached. The front door looked like it might open, but when I pulled on it, it only moved a little, like something was blocking it from the inside. We circled around and found a kitchen window that was halfway shattered. Carefully, one by one, we climbed in. The smell hit us immediately, rotten and musty. A mix of damp walls, rotting wood, and maybe a dead animal or two. It was awful, but we kept going. What struck us first was how empty it was. No furniture, no personal items, not even thick layers of dust, like someone had lived here somewhat recently, but left in a hurry, and somehow cleaned up before going. There was only one thing, a huge pile of stuff, plastic chairs, old suitcases, large boxes, all stacked tightly in front of the main door. That explained why it wouldn't open, but more than that, it looked intentional, like someone had built a barricade from the inside. We slowly moved through room after room, no sounds but our own footsteps. The wooden floor creaked, and mold covered most of the walls. We found the staircase, narrow and barely holding up, and went upstairs. There were 3 doors. We opened them one by one. The first room was empty, just peeling paint and water stains on the ceiling. The second was smaller, but also empty. The third was weird. It felt more like a hallway than a room, narrow, no windows. But what really puzzled us was the layout. It didn't match the size of the house. Based on the exterior, there should have been at least one more room up here. We knocked on some of the walls in that odd room, but they sounded solid. Tyler even suggested there might be a hidden space behind them. But we found nothing, no doors, no seams, so we eventually headed back downstairs. As we crossed the lower floor again, something changed. The silence felt heavier, not just quiet, but oppressive. We slowed down. I noticed Sean starting to look nervous. "Let's get out of here," I said. They both nodded quickly. We headed back to the kitchen window. As soon as my feet hit the grass again, the cold night air felt freeing, like a weight lifted off my chest. We got into the car, still in silence. But just before I started the engine, something made me stop. That strange room upstairs only had one window, right? But now I saw 2 windows dimly glowing from that side of the house. I pointed it out to Tyler and Sean. They looked too. I could tell by their faces. They saw it too. And then something moved behind one of the curtains, a shadow, quick and faint, but enough to know someone was standing in there, watching us through the thin fabric. We didn't waste another second. I hit the gas and sped down that dirt road. Not a word was said the whole way back. The next day we went to the police, maybe out of guilt or just to be sure. A few officers checked out the house, searched every corner. They said no one was there. No sign anyone had lived there or even squatted. No hidden rooms, no signs of life at all. But we know what we saw. And honestly, if we'd pushed further that night, tried breaking down that weird wall upstairs, I'm not sure all of us would have made it out, because whatever or whoever was back there clearly didn't want to be found.